Alright, in this video I will be discussing Task 2, which is instructing and engaging students in learning. This task really focuses on the lesson plans that will be submitted in the edTPA and everything surrounding them, including the video and the commentary. So today I will be discussing the lessons and the video. Actually, the lessons, the video, and the commentary. One main aspect that each lesson must have is a central focus. If you scroll through the handbook, it also says that you need a central focus in the second point. What kinds of learning tasks actively engage students in the central focus of the learning segment? So a central focus is a specific statement that explains what the lesson will teach. It really guides the lesson, and that's why it's called a central focus. It's like the focal point of the lesson. As an example of the central focus, I'm moving to a lesson that I created for ETE 313. In this lesson, my central focus was the essential literacy strategy is to identify characters and plot points in a story. The students will use a story frame to summarize the plot of a book. And then I give a few other examples of how the students will demonstrate their knowledge. Dr. Arquette really stressed to explain how the students will show their knowledge of the central focus, but some different central focuses might be a little more general, where they might just include the first sentence of really what the lesson will be about. Moving back to the handbook and my notes. Once the lessons are written and you are considering your students' academic learning, personal, cultural, and community assets, you're going to actually be preparing to video. Before creating your video, it is really important to get all of the permission slips. At this time, because of my CT schedule, I only have five of my forms turned in, so I need to go in my placement and remind my students to keep passing them in. When you are videoing your lesson, you're going to submit 2 video clips. Each one is going to be no more than 20 minutes, but not less than 3 minutes. I had the opportunity of practicing making an edTPA video in ETE 336. I believe that was the history methods class. In that project, we created a field trip plan and videoed ourselves teaching one of the lessons as part of that plan. I was looking for that video to include in this, but I could not find it. Alright. Next, you're going to support your students to comprehend or compose text. It is not enough for a student to simply listen to the lesson and discuss. They must show proof of their understanding through comprehending or composing text. So through comprehending, maybe you would ask some assessment questions at the end and maybe use like a checklist or some kind of rubric to assess the student knowledge. For composing text, maybe they're writing a paragraph summarizing their knowledge about the lesson. Alright. So with your video requirements, really consider what makes a good video. Consider the sound, the visuals, and do not have any interruptions in your videos. Do not edit your video, because edTPA is really stressing the importance of having a one take, one shot, not little edits where you can tell that once you have your video clips selected, then you are able to go into the what to write section of the handbook, which is the commentary. And with the commentary are a bunch of questions that you will answer in order to prove that your lessons are well researched. In this area, you are going to consider how you taught a literacy strategy and the skills, which I really practiced when I was writing my ETE 315 thematic unit. My thematic unit was talking about mythology, and I included several books about folktales and other tales from the past and linked them into a fictional unit. So one of my lessons had the objective where students will identify the basic elements of a story: setting, problems, roadblocks, high point, and solution. And this was my literacy strategy, to be able to map out the plot of a story. So the skills for that would be to first determine where the setting was, and to find out the problems, roadblocks, high point, and solution within the story. So for this, I would have the students, first I would talk about the vocabulary words, then we would do a literacy circle, and after that I would introduce a graphic organizer to help my students understand the elements of a story. That is how I really taught my essential question, which is sort of like essential focus, is just a little more general. Some of the other topics that you're going to be discussing are how you elicited and built on student responses to promote thinking, and apply the essential literacy strategy using related skills. I find that the best way to build on student responses is to have a discussion. If you have the students talking about their thinking, then the teacher can ask further questions in order to ensure that the students understand the concept. So you're going to go through and answer the rest of these questions. I'm not going to discuss them today just due to time. I want to make sure I have time to discuss the different learning theories before I end this video. Alright, the next area has instruction rubrics. And that is really more of the assessment, so how your teaching will be assessed. And because of that, my next video will be assessments, work samples, and commentary. So for that area, I'm going to be discussing the rubrics next week. That is a little foretaste. The first video that we watched about learning theorists was for constructivism, and that is where students work through equations or other problems in order to create meaning from experience. And when I was considering what lesson to include for this area, I thought immediately of my last semester lesson plan. Alright, so for ETE 239, I taught about the pioneers. We were talking about westward expansion in my class. And before teaching my lesson, I decided to have vocabulary stations, where I included a picture of the vocabulary word along with a hint, and asked the students to work in groups in order to hypothesize what the vocabulary word was. And this was really constructivism, because they were using the information they had, the picture and the hint, in order to construct the meaning of a vocabulary word. And they did that with several pictures, like maps and such. Alright, the next video was about behaviorism, which is where students are really affected by antecedents and consequences. So when a student is considering how to behave, they consider what outcomes their actions will have and decide whether it is a good idea to act in that way. One example that the video gave was that a child might watch TV when they're done with homework. That would be a privilege because it is a reward for finishing their homework. I've actually seen behaviorism within the classroom. My CT warned one of her students that if they kept acting up, they would have to go to the principal's office. And immediately the student became more engaged. They stopped talking back and started listening to my cooperating teacher. The next video was about cognitivism, which considers the brain and how the brain processes information, organizes it, and stores it, sort of like a computer. With the cognitivism step, lessons must be organized, sequenced, and understandable. With that, it is very important to have clear directions in order to ensure that your students understand what's happening. Within my lessons, I have supported cognitivism by explaining directions one at a time. What I try to do is I stand in front of the class, explain directions, ask for questions, and then hand out materials. Because I've learned that if you hand out materials before you explain directions, your students will be focusing more on what they have in their hand than what you are saying. One lesson that I created to have very specific directions was for ETE 238 because I was working with English language learners, and I believe that was at Glen Oak, but that was 2 semesters ago. For this lesson, I was targeting helping kindergartners. So what I did with, oh yes, it is this document. With my worksheet, I wanted to make sure I wasn't giving too many directions at the same time. So I had a little sentence of directions, and then I had the student work. And then for the next activity, I had a new set of directions. And this ensured that the students weren't reading very many directions at the beginning and then having to do multiple different tasks. And it also gave them a little mental break between the 2 segments. And that is everything I have about task 2. Next week I will be posting a video more about the assessment, how my work will be assessed, and how I will be assessing my students. That will also include work samples and commentary, a little more about the commentary that I will be discussing.